There's a particular kind of quiet that settles into a house after someone leaves it for good. Not the quiet of an empty room, not the quiet of early morning before anyone's awake. It's heavier than that. It has weight. It sits on the furniture, and it hangs in the doorways, and it follows you from room to room no matter how many lights you turn on. I learned that quiet the winter my wife died, and I spent almost 2 years trying to outrun it before I figured out that I'd been running in the wrong direction the whole time. My wife's name was Diane. We met at a company picnic in the summer of 1981. She was there with a friend. I was there because my supervisor told me it was mandatory, and we ended up sitting next to each other at a picnic table eating potato salad and arguing about a movie neither of us had seen. That was us. We'd argue about anything, warmly, happily, the way people do when they like each other too much to care who's right. We were married the following June. We had our daughter 3 years after that. We built a life in Indianapolis, the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable kind that doesn't look like much from the outside, but means everything from within. Diane was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia in the fall of 2020. We had 14 months from diagnosis. The doctors were honest with us from the beginning about what that meant, and I think Diane was more at peace with it than I was. She had a way of accepting things that I never fully understood and probably never will. I'm more of a fixer by nature. I spent 32 years as a civil engineer, and the first instinct is always to find the load-bearing problem and solve it. There was nothing to fix. I sat with that helplessness every day for 14 months, and I never got used to it. She passed in January of 2022. I'm not going to tell you the details of that because some things don't belong to a story. What I will tell you is that when I came home from the hospital that evening, the first thing I did was stand in the kitchen for a long time looking at the coffee maker. She had set it on a timer before we'd left for the hospital 2 days earlier. It had been brewing coffee every morning since then, right on schedule, into an empty pot. I unplugged it. I sat down on the floor with my back against the refrigerator, and I stayed there for a while. I don't know how long. That's the honest version. My daughter called every day that first month. She lives in Cincinnati, about 2 hours south, with her husband and their 2 boys. She'd married her husband 6 years before Diane passed. He worked in commercial real estate, had a firm handshake, and a way of talking that always felt slightly like a presentation. Diane had been cautiously warm with him. She never said anything specific. Just once, maybe a year into their marriage, she said he reminded her of someone who kept very careful score. I told her she was being unfair. I thought she was being unfair. My daughter's calls were good. We talked about Diane, about old memories, about nothing in particular. She worried about me in the house alone. I told her I was fine. I was not entirely fine, but I was managing, which at 64 felt like enough of an achievement. Around April, about 3 months after Diane died, my daughter started mentioning the house in a certain way. Never directly. She'd say things like, the property taxes on that side of Indianapolis had really climbed, or that a lot of her friends' parents had downsized and found it freeing, or that maintaining a 4-bedroom house alone seemed like a lot of work for one person. She wasn't wrong about any of it. The house was too big. I knew it. I just wasn't ready to say so out loud, because saying so out loud meant agreeing that the life that had filled it was finished. Her husband started joining the calls around May. He was friendly in a way that felt organized. He asked about my health, my sleep, whether I was keeping up with the yard. He mentioned, almost in passing, that their house in Cincinnati had a finished lower level, walkout basement, its own entrance, full bath, a small sitting room. They'd been using it for storage. It would be simple to convert, he said. Nothing fancy, but private and comfortable. My daughter said she just wanted me to know the door was open, that there was no pressure, that they loved me and wanted me close. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 2 months. I made a list, the way I always do when I'm trying to think clearly. The list said what the list always says when you're lonely and grieving. The reasons to go outnumbered, the reasons to stay. In June, I put the Indianapolis house on the market. I packed what mattered and drove to Cincinnati. That first summer was the best season I'd had since Diane got sick. I want to say that plainly. My daughter and I cooked dinner together on Thursday nights the way Diane and I used to. Except my daughter makes a much better sauce, and she knows it. My son-in-law grilled on weekends and was perfectly pleasant about it. The boys were 9 and 11, both of them in that loud, sprawling phase of childhood where everything is either extremely exciting or extremely terrible, with very little in between. The older one was obsessed with video games in a way that made me feel outdated, but he'd explain them to me with extraordinary patience. The younger one had recently discovered magic tricks and performed the same 3 tricks for me approximately 40 times that summer, each time with total commitment, as though the reveal were new. I picked them up from school twice a week. I helped with homework. I took them to the pool on Saturdays when my daughter was working. I taught the older one how to change a bike tire. The younger one taught me his magic tricks in return, and I still know all 3 of them. The lower level was exactly what they'd described. My own entrance around the side of the house. A good bathroom, a sitting room with a decent window. I had my chair, my books, my television. I kept my own hours. It worked. My daughter and I had coffee together most mornings on the back deck, and those were the best part of my day for a long time. My Indianapolis house sold in August. 3 months on the market. Final price was strong. After the mortgage payoff, the commissions, the repairs I'd made before listing, I walked away with roughly $210,000. That went into my savings account. That was mine and Diane's, built over decades. The whole accumulated weight of a working life. Things changed in the fall. Not all at once. That's the thing about gradual pressure. By the time you can identify it, it's already been on you for a while. My son-in-law mentioned in October that the house had been more expensive to run than they'd anticipated. New construction, higher utility costs, the neighborhood HOA fees. He wasn't asking for anything. He just mentioned it, the way you mentioned the weather. My daughter nodded in a way that suggested they'd talked about this before I was in the room. I mentioned a few weeks later that I wanted to help more with the household costs. I said it felt right. I started covering the grocery runs, which were substantial for a family of 4 plus me. I estimated I was spending about $450 a month on food. Fine. That made sense. By November, I was also covering the streaming subscriptions and the boys' internet costs, since I used them as much as anyone. Another $80 a month. My son-in-law thanked me for being practical about it. In January, my daughter mentioned that the furnace had needed unexpected work, a significant repair, and that it had come at a rough time between the holidays and a slow month for my son-in-law's commercial deals. I paid the repair bill without being asked. $2,200. The furnace served the whole house, my space included, so it seemed reasonable. In February, I took the boys to 3 separate baseball showcases over the course of the month because the older one had started taking the sport seriously, and my son-in-law's weekends were consumed with client meetings. I covered registration fees, equipment, gas. I didn't track it precisely. It added up to somewhere around $600 that month. In March, I started writing things down, not for any confrontational reason, just because I'm an engineer and numbers are how I understand things. What the numbers told me, by the end of March, was that I had contributed approximately $900 a month in direct costs to the household since November, not counting my time or the one-time repair bill or the sports costs, and the contributions had not come from any agreement. They'd come from individual moments, each one reasonable in isolation, each one becoming the new floor. My son-in-law came down to my space one evening in April, sat in the chair across from mine. He had his business voice on, the one that sounds warm but moves in a specific direction. He said they'd been talking, he and my daughter, and that they wanted to be transparent with me because I was family. He said the house had appreciated significantly since they bought it, and that the lower level, if they were to rent it on the open market, would easily bring in $1,500 a month in the current Cincinnati rental market. Maybe more. He said he wasn't suggesting anything like that. He said he just wanted to be honest. because he thought I deserved honesty. Then he said he thought a fair contribution from my end, given the space I occupied and the household costs, would be around $800 a month, in addition to what I was already covering. I sat with that for a moment. I asked what my daughter thought. He said they'd talked it through together and were aligned. He used the word aligned. I told him I'd think about it. He said he appreciated my flexibility. He went back upstairs. I sat in my chair for a long time after he left. I thought about Diane. I thought about what she'd said about him keeping careful score. I thought about how long she had been right about things I'd chosen not to hear. I called my old friend Warren the next morning. Warren was my closest friend from my engineering days. Retired to Asheville. Widower himself since 2018. He listened without interrupting, which is a skill Warren has that I've always admired. When I finished, he said, "Tell me every dollar you've given them since you moved in." I went through it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're not a guest in that house. You're a resource. There's a difference." I spent the next several days writing down everything. The grocery costs, the utilities I'd voluntarily taken on, the furnace repair, the sports costs, the school pickups. I am not going to tell you the number I arrived at, but I will tell you it was more than I had understood it to be when the pieces were separated. When you add them together and look at them in a column, they say something clearly that the individual moments were designed to obscure. I didn't say anything right away. I kept things normal. I had coffee with my daughter in the mornings. I helped the younger one with a school project about the water cycle, which he approached with impressive seriousness. I drove the older one to practice twice that week. Everything looked fine from the outside, and maybe that was part of what bothered me. It looked fine because I was still doing all of it while the question of what I owed them sat unanswered on the table. My son-in-law brought it up again 2 weeks after the first conversation. Casual at dinner. He asked if I'd had a chance to think things over. My daughter looked at her plate. I said I had been thinking about it, yes. He said he didn't want it to become a source of tension, and that he hoped we could land on something that worked for everyone. He said everyone with a particular kind of reasonableness that I recognized from 40 years of contract negotiations. It's the voice that sounds collaborative, but has already decided. I said I appreciated the conversation and I'd get back to him. He said he looked forward to it. That night I called Warren again. I told him about the second conversation. He said, "You already know what you're going to do. You're just buying yourself time to be sure." I told him I wasn't sure I did know. He said, "You wouldn't be calling me twice in 2 weeks if any part of you thought writing that check was the right answer." I sat with that. My daughter came down to my space the following Saturday morning. My son-in-law had taken the boys to a birthday party. She sat across from me, and she had the look she's had since she was a little girl when she's about to say something she's been rehearsing. She said she wanted to talk to me separately, just the two of us. She said she knew the conversation with her husband hadn't been easy. She said she wanted me to know that she loved me and wanted me there, and that she thought we could work something out that was fair. Then she said the same number he had said. $800 a month. I looked at my daughter for a moment. The daughter I had driven to piano lessons for 6 years. The daughter Diane sat up with through every hard night of every hard year of her adolescence. The daughter who called us every Sunday without fail until Diane got sick, and then called us every day. I said, "I want to show you something." I got my notebook. I sat down next to her and I went through the column of numbers. I showed her what I had spent on the household since November. I showed her the furnace bill. I showed her the sports costs. I showed her the estimate for school pickups at any standard childcare rate, which I had looked up. I showed her what I had contributed since moving in. I added the number at the bottom, and I let her look at it. She was quiet for a long time. She said, "I didn't know all of it was that much." I said, "I know you didn't. That's what I wanted you to see." She said, We didn't plan for it to go that way." I said I believed her. And I did, actually, believe that she hadn't planned it. I'm not sure her husband could say the same, but my daughter is not a calculated person. She had just been living in a house where costs were framed in one direction and contributions were not mentioned, and over time a picture had formed that wasn't accurate. She started to cry. Not dramatically, just the way she does when something lands wrong. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't want me to feel like they'd taken advantage of me. I said I didn't think she had meant to. She said she needed to talk to her husband. I said that was a good idea. I give her that. She had the harder conversation with him that I was not present for. And whatever was said, he did not bring the subject up with me again. But the air in the house changed after that. It was polite. It was careful. My son-in-law was courteous in the way people are when they've been caught at something and decided the most dignified response is to be impeccably civil. My daughter was warm, but there was something strained beneath it. The way a room feels after furniture has been moved and the old shapes are still visible on the carpet. I called Warren. He asked how I was sleeping. I said not great. He asked where I wanted to be in 6 months. I told him I'd been thinking about that. He said, then start moving toward it. I had already started, actually. Quietly. I'd spent 2 evenings that week looking at condominiums in the Cincinnati area. Not to fantasize, to plan. I'm an engineer. Planning is what makes a thing real. There was a development in Hyde Park I'd noticed online. Older building, well-maintained, good bones. 2 bedrooms, a balcony facing east for the morning light, covered parking, a reasonable HOA. In a building full of adults who had their own lives and no reason to track yours. I called the listing agent and set up a showing without telling anyone. I went on a Tuesday while the boys were at school and my daughter was working, and my son-in-law was at his office. The unit was on the 3rd floor, south and east light, which Diane always said was the best combination. The kitchen had been updated. The 2nd bedroom was small but workable. The balcony looked over a courtyard with some mature trees. I stood on that balcony for about 5 minutes, and I thought about what Warren had said. I thought about the column of numbers in my notebook. I thought about my son-in-law's voice when he said aligned. I thought about Diane sitting next to the coffee maker she'd set the night before everything changed. I told the agent I'd be in touch within the week. I told my daughter first, just the 2 of us on a Thursday evening after dinner. I told her I loved her and the boys, and that nothing about what I was about to say changed any of that. Then I told her I'd found a place and I was going to buy it. She was quiet. Then she asked if it was because of the money conversation. I said it was because of a lot of things, and that the money conversation had made some of those things clearer, but hadn't created them. I told her I needed to be in a space that was mine without conditions. She started to say something about how I didn't have to do this, and I told her, gently, that I thought I did. Not out of anger, out of knowing myself well enough to understand what I needed. She cried again. I held her hand across the table the way I used to do when she was young and had hurt herself and was deciding whether to fall apart or be brave. She chose brave, same as always. I told my son-in-law the following evening. The 3 of us at the kitchen table, the boys upstairs. I told them I'd be moving in 6 weeks. He said he was sorry to hear that and hoped it hadn't come to this because of any misunderstanding. I said I didn't think there had been a misunderstanding at all. He looked at me for a moment, and I looked back. And something passed between us that didn't require any more words. He said he hoped I'd be happy in the new place. I said I expected I would be. Those 6 weeks were the quietest stretch of time I've spent in a house full of people. Everyone was kind. Everyone was careful. My son-in-law helped me move 2 pieces of furniture to my car on the last day without being asked. The boys were told that Grandpa was getting his own apartment nearby, which I presented as a good thing because there was a roof deck with a grill and a view of the skyline, and the older one asked if they could have sleepovers, and I said absolutely. I closed on the Hyde Park unit on a Friday in October, moved in that afternoon, put my chair in the spot where the east light would hit it in the morning, set up my coffee maker, the one I'd bought after I unplugged the old one in Indianapolis, and set it to brew for 6:30. The first morning, I woke up before the alarm, which I always do when something important is happening, even when I don't consciously register it as important. I made coffee. I sat on the balcony in a sweater because the October air had some teeth to it. I watched the trees in the courtyard. I had nowhere to be and nothing to cover and no one scheduled to account for. I sat there for an hour. No one texted. No one knocked. No one had a conversation to revisit. It felt like taking a full breath for the first time in a long time. My daughter brought the boys over that first weekend. The older one immediately wanted to see the roof deck. The younger one performed one of his magic tricks in my kitchen with a flourish I hadn't seen before he'd been practicing. And I told him it was better than ever. Which was true. My daughter stood on the balcony and looked out at the courtyard and said it was really nice. I said I thought so too. There was something loose between us, easier, the way it gets when nobody needs anything from anybody. My son-in-law texted 2 days after the move, said he hoped the transition had gone smoothly. I replied that it had. Short, true, and I left it at that. I see the boys every week. Tuesdays I take the younger one to his magic club, which is an actual organized thing I did not know existed, held at the library branch near their school. The older one has gotten into distance running, which surprised everyone, including him, and I meet him at the park on Sunday mornings, and we walk while he runs laps. We talk about whatever. He's 12 now, and starting to have opinions about things, real ones, and I find that I look forward to those conversations more than almost anything else in my week. My daughter and I have coffee twice a month. Sometimes more. We've had some honest conversations in the months since the move. The kind of honesty that can only happen when there's no shared ceiling. She said things about that period that I think were hard for her to say. I've said things back that I'd held on to. We've come out on the other side of those conversations closer than we were before any of it started, which I did not anticipate, but am grateful for. She told me once that she'd known something was off earlier than she'd admitted to herself, that she'd let her husband frame things in ways she hadn't challenged the way she should have. She said it without excusing herself, just named it. I told her I appreciated that more than she knew, and I do. I come from a generation of men who were not particularly well trained in saying things like that out loud, but Diane spent 40 years working on me, and it apparently took hold. My son-in-law and I are cordial. We will not be close. I've made a full peace with that. There are people in your life who are in your life because of love, and people who are in your life because of proximity and circumstance, and occasionally you get to find out which category someone belongs to. I know what I know now. It doesn't make me angry. It just makes me clear what I want to say, because I think it's the part that matters most, is this. I spent 2 years after Diane died being so afraid of being alone that I confused presence with safety. I thought being inside a family's house meant I was held. I thought being needed meant I was valued, and for a while it did. And for a while it was real. But there's a particular kind of using that disguises itself as love for as long as you let it. And the disguise only works if you need the love badly enough to accept the imitation. I was 65 years old, widowed, grieving, and willing to contribute anything to feel like I still had a place in the world. That willingness is not a character flaw. It came from love, but I let it be used as an open door, and the door got walked through a little further every month until I was standing in a house that had my groceries in the refrigerator and my tools in the garage and my grandchildren in the rooms upstairs, and still being asked what else I could offer. I know what I'm worth now. Not in the financial sense. I mean, I know the weight of what I bring, the constancy of it, the loyalty of it. And I know that anyone who looks at that and sees a negotiating position is not someone whose terms I'm interested in meeting. I'm 66 years old. I live 12 minutes from my grandchildren. I have a second bedroom that I am very slowly turning into a reading room, because Diane always said I needed a reading room and she was right. I have a balcony where I drink my coffee in the east morning light. I have a savings account with my name on it and my wife's years in it. And that money is going to stay exactly where it is. I have a friend in Asheville who calls on Thursday evenings and a daughter who is becoming, slowly and honestly, the person I always believed she was. I have Tuesday evenings at the library, watching a 10-year-old make a coin disappear, and I have Sunday mornings at the park, and I have the knowledge that all of it belongs to me, freely, without a column of numbers attached. Diane would say I should have moved faster. She would be right. But I got here. And being here, I've found turns out to be enough.